Thank you so much for joining our session today. It's a pleasure being here today. Our topic is, as anticipated, how tax authorities use data and this important digital controversy war on tax that we have been hearing during the introduction. We will start. Next slide, please. The other one, please. So nowadays, tax administrations across the globe are going digital at an unprecedented pace, as you know. The question, of course, to start is what led to this increased automation or digitalization by tax authorities in general, and why now? To try to reply to these two questions, we need, of course, to start by focusing on the contexts and on the so-called agents of change, which you see listed in this in the slides. One of the agents is certainly the politicization of the tax debate. You have heard in the introduction many times NGOs being mentioned. What we see is that there is a sense of urgency, like a kind of emotion in the tax debate in general. The tax debate invaded the news. The citizens in general now speak about tax, and the question combined with the financial crisis and the stateless income raised the attention of governments worldwide, which struggle with revenue collection, and now even more starting with this pandemic event, terrible pandemic event that we are dealing with. And that put even more pressure on the revenue collection, while governments had to launch specific incentives to try to minimize the impact of the pandemic event. So if before governments were already struggling with a lack of revenue, now they are struggling even more. So we expect for sure further tax disputes, not only because of the tax framework evolving, but also because tax administrations are struggling for revenue. So the society in general claims this fairer tax system and a sort of corporate social responsibility from business and moral tax, and a more efficient tax system, and demand a more efficient tax collection. So the technology from tax administrations is also set to help this purpose. In addition to all of this, there is also a general demand for more transparency and a more simplified and efficient tax system. So it's a kind of digital revolution. We have the globalization, the digitalization of business, that has led to a huge increase in trade transactions around the world. We have interconnected value chains, the rise of new business models that raise concerns from the fact of the tax system, and the tax system demand new rules that we have been discussing. And we assist to a significant global shift in tax policy. So governments are demanding greater transparency, introducing new rules, provisions that need to fit this digitalized economy. And they are investing. They are investing in technology because they lack resources. And technology will for sure help them meet their goals. Consider also that we have to take into consideration that the OECD-led debate on base erosion and profit shifting initiative, the BEPS debate, conferred tax administration with tremendous amounts of data, that they didn't get access before. So as Steph was mentioning before, the Big Brother is really watching you on a real-time basis. And we need to be aware of what are the tools that tax administrations have worldwide, monitor the developments in order to be able to protect ourselves, react in the proper manner, and try to avoid the disputes. As we said, governments are more and more focusing on real-time reporting in order to increase this compliance and collection. And this means that tax authorities will have direct access to company data. And this will allow that taxpayer information is cross-referenced, as we heard before, exchange among tax administrations, either through CBCR or even through the DA6 initiative and all of the sources of tools that were launched to improve the tax transparency within the framework. So this to say that, of course, tax authorities will have a nearly perfect window into individual companies and entire industries. And the artificial intelligence and these tools that they are investing, and this is not science fiction, this is happening now. We will give you several examples of the use of AI also from the side of tax administrations. These tools will mine these insights to evaluate the profitability and the adequacy of tax payments, and more precise, to help choose audit targets for risk assessment procedure. So let's just thinking about the CBCR exchanges. This means that tax authorities have a picture on the revenue they derive from multinational companies with what it pays in another jurisdiction. And they might simply find not appropriate and might simply start challenging it. Are we prepared for this increased dispute? Next slide, please. Thank you. As I said, so more tax administrations are going digital and they are investing in sophisticated technology. This doesn't mean, of course, that it's the end of the tax return. This is not the case. But we should be aware that gradually tax administrations worldwide are increasing data submission requirements, enhancing data analytics routines, doing more routine sharing of electronic files, meaning that this sharing of information happens not only between the taxpayer and the tax administration, but between the tax authorities themselves. So this is definitely changing and speeding up the entire proceeding. We are entering in a real-time transmission of granular transaction data, and having the tax authorities making a sort of direct assessments. With all these investments in technology, etc., from tax administrations, what we expect is that companies will face risks and exposure if their people, their processes, and their systems are not aligned with the government requirements and expectations, and they don't have a clear control on their data and on their they are ready to sensitize their data. So we should bear in mind that data is the new oil, as we are hearing a lot on the publications and everywhere. So we should bear this in mind, and this is the oil also for tax administrations. The developments, and as I said, need to be carefully monitoring. So the level of information that needs to be provided to tax authority is getting more and more detailed. And what we should consider is that from the side of corporations, the tax department in the multinationals still relies, in the majority of the cases, on data provided by different departments within the company. The companies are also struggling with reduced budgets. There is sometimes a reluctance in investing in technology. So we should consider carefully the shift from the side of tax administrations if we want to prepare and avoid disputes in the future. Of course, data availability, data consistency, I don't need to tell you that it's critical to secure data. And we expect a lot of risks by having tax authorities having increased information and leveraging on this information. Imagine if tax administrations worldwide decide to take the next step and to harmonize their digital platforms across administrations, allowing that there is a sort of standardization on the kind of data that they use. My goodness, I would say that we are heading too fast. Hope that we don't go into that we don't reach this scenario in the short time. But also, as I said, this whole revolution in the technology scenario from tax administration is impacting taxpayers' rights. And how is the whole new technology environment at administration level changing our right to be heard or informed? Do we have the right to react? Do we have access to all the tools used by tax administration? I don't know, for example, if they use AI algorithms, do taxpayers have access to these formulas and algorithms in order to have to defend themselves in the proper way? Not sure that this happens in all the cases. So what we assist is that tax administrations are becoming more and more data agencies, and we should bear this in mind. Next slide, please. Okay, we have in this slide, we try to represent the different levels of automation, the usually 5 different levels of automation that we assist in the majority of tax administrations. This doesn't mean that the evolution from one level goes straight to the other. We have cases where administrations immediately jump to 2 levels ahead. It really depends. So the chart starts with level 1, the e-filing, which is known by the standardized electronic form for filing tax returns. Then a second level, which goes to the e-accounting. It's characterized by the submission of accounting or other source data to support filings, for example, invoices and trial balances in a specific electronic format. And here we have, for example, Italy that introduced the mandatory electronic invoicing to help tackle the parallel economy and try to improve VAT collection. So to improve their system. Then we have the e-match. One example is Portugal, where tax administration is able to cross-check information collected with even bank statements. Level 4, e-audit. The case of Russia, where we have data analyzed by government entities and cross-checked to filings in real time. And we have taxpayers that that are receiving these electronic audit assessments and have really limited time to respond. And here again, we see how are taxpayer rights protected? Are they safeguarding? And then the level 5, which would be the ESS, and it's the example of Spain, which government entities using submitted data to assess tax without the need for tax forms in a very automated way. Next slide, please. Do you want to go, Nupur?
Oh,
or should I continue?
Yeah, I will just add to what you said. So coming from your point and adding more from the organization perspective also, we see now more and more business is moving into data-driven business model, which is increasing the risk of data, and every nation is fighting for data sovereignty issues or the data localization route. So that also increases a need for looking more on how to streamline the actual use of data. Is it good idea to have a properly marked data value chain? Will that help? Luan, you want to comment anything?
I think that will help. Yes, yes. That was I.
Luan, you want to comment anything on that?
Yeah. I'm here. Yeah. Do you hear me? Yeah.
Yes. We hear.
I think that could be the case. Yeah. So because what I brought forward in the previous section was that we should have first a charter developed on a country basis that protected the civilians against unjustified intrusion into their private privacy and in the private sphere. So that could be foregoing. Yeah.
Louan, sorry for interrupt a little bit. There's noise in your background sound.
Yeah, I know. Now it's now it's stopped. That was a telephone.
Thank you so much. Please continue.
Yeah, I know. So I will repeat. Yes, I promoted to have a charter developed, a legal charter for the protection of civilians against unlawful intrusion of enforcing in their private sphere to big data, to extract them from their private environment. Because if it is not necessary for crime fighting purposes, for instance, because then it's justified. But in a normal sphere, there's always an equal-handed policy. An equal-handed policy means, of equal arms policy, that every civilian has the right to defend itself against an attack. Whether the attack is justified or not, that doesn't matter. We can see that in court, whether it is justified. But they have the right to defend them. The data sampling is not unqualified and is not unrestricted. They have to have a good reason to extract data and within certain boundaries, not in excess of these boundaries. These have to be formulated in a data charter, a national data mining charter, and that's what I see as a forerunning measure which has to be taken and put into action before data mining can be exercised.
And preferably, Louan,
I agree.
That can be enforced.
Yeah,
and not only
of course.
A beautiful window where you have all the rights and obligations listed, but then it's not enforced and put in practice.
Yeah, sure. So,
but Luan, a question to this I would like to add, like every country will come out with their own data privacy law. So having a single charter won't suffice the purpose. If we have been hearing out from long time, okay, there should be taxpayer charter. So if every nation comes up with its own taxpayer charter, it adds to the problem of for the taxpayer. Like taxpayer has to go through every charter. So can there be some unanimous solution to this? What do you think on this point?
I think that the protection from data is, for instance, on a European level, that is intended to protect, for instance, employees against elaboration of their data by their employers, as we have it in PPA as well, and then in the whole European. That's based on the European directive. That's something different from a general taxpayer charter. That is part of the taxpayer rights, because it is the counterpart of taxpayer rights. So I think countries should have something in that direction, but not all the countries have that. I think that countries which are not democratically ruled, and so more it's dictatorship. I don't mention any country, but you can mention it, you can find it yourself. They have not that kind of protection, like they don't have the kind of protection against inflicting with crime investigation. They can based on racism or whatever. That they don't have that. So they don't have a tax charter as well, and that I think in the democratic countries the taxpayer rights will be justified and will be respected from one time to another. But in other countries which are not ruled in the same way, I wonder whether they have taxpayer rights in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's good.
So
and
that's
it's
what.
good to, sorry, Nupur, just if I may, just to add something. It's good to see that taxpayer rights protection is it's on the agenda of the European Union. Yeah. It's one, for example, of the topics that the platform for tax good governance listed as priority for this new mandate of the platform. So this is good news because there were several initiatives going on. The Model Taxpayer Charter proposed by, for example, the CFE Tax Advisors Europe and several initiatives to trying to push towards a more strengthen of taxpayer rights. But I think that the fact that also the EU is putting a focus on taxpayer rights brings some hope to this point.
Yeah, that's a good point. So every nation is trying to bring up some or the other point. Like in India also, we recently had taxpayers charter bill. So the thing is, my question is more from the point of view of taxpayer. Does having different taxpayer right bill from different jurisdiction brings more complication for the taxpayer in terms of following those rules? Or there should be some uniform guidance which each state can follow? Or again, this will hit the sovereignty issue if some policy making organization sets up standards for taxpayers' right.
If I may, Nupur, I think that the issue of taxpayers' rights it's quite delicate. So I doubt that we would be able to. It would be good to be able to push for global standards or global minimum standards. And this is what several organizations are trying to do. But for the time being, I think that we should also consider that in many jurisdictions, they are not present in this country. So better if we start considering that we need to have them. They need to be there, and then better to be there and it are not harmonized than rather than have it.
Yeah, that's right.
So so this brings me to other question, like if pillar 1 and pillar 2 goes through, and then the entire problem of data economy, which is still not taken completely into account in pillar 1 or pillar 2 solution, will come into picture. Of course, pillar 2 is not going to resolve the entire tax competition issue.
Yeah. The tax
So
competition
should this be taken into account by the policy making organization, by OECD itself, to bring some consensus on some minimum standards from taxpayer right perspective also, so that we see more of a taxpayer right initiative by different members of inclusive framework itself?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Should we go to next slide?
So move to next.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of slides to go.
Yeah, this is the slide. I think this you have already covered in bit. So the entire crux of the previous slide.
Yeah.
Zoe, can you go to previous slide? Yeah, the entire crux of this slide was to think on or deliberate on the issue that is this raising more risk from the taxpayer perspective, the more automation or the more use of data analytics tool by the tax administration is bringing more risk and increasing the burden of proof from the taxpayer, and can that burden of proof can be used for the detriment of the taxpayer?
Yeah.
So we thought that, yeah, of course there are benefits of using digital tools, but there are drawbacks also, which we have tried to list down here, and which broadly Filipa has already mentioned. So I'm not going to elaborate on this point again, but rather I would like to focus on the burden of proof point, which Louan should explain. Louan, would you like to go with the burden of proof point of your
Burden of proof point. Yeah, that's
process?
one of my points in one of my questions that I brought forward. I think that, but that is the datafication and the data factory developments could be tantamount to a sort of silent reversal of the burden of proof to the benefit of the tax inspector. That could be, should not be, but that's the reason why a tax charter is useful, because that they have so many advances into the world of data that they can figure out an analysis by data analytics, which they come to the end decision that someone is just suspicious of committing tax fraud, and that is and then the person has to person or the company has to prove that it is not true. So that he is to prove something which is negative. It's not true. And to prove something which is negative is much more difficult than to prove something which is positive. So that's an unfair division of the burden of proof. And that can be in a silent manner, can take place. You can't notice it. And that's one of my questions.
Let's hear.
Yeah.
Thanks, Luan. Let's hear some views from the participants also on this. We have Pierre Giorgio here, or anybody else want to comment on this?
As a participant.
Yeah, Belisa is there. Belisa, you want to speak something?
No way. I agree with what Louan said. Nothing to add from my side.
But to me, it seems that, yeah, to an extent, what Louan is saying is okay. But it, from a taxpayer's, if I think from tax authority perspective, the tax authority does not know the intricacies of how, if I talk about, let's take an example of data-driven business model. The tax authority doesn't know the intricacies of the data value chain of that data-driven business model. So they need to involve taxpayer in some or the other manner, or to have taxpayer right to say or shift the burden of proof to explain the entire procedure. So in some cases, I think might be the problem might be there with less developed country, but with the developed country, I still believe that it may not be to the detriment of the taxpayer if they are able to explain the thing or the business completely.
But I think that the taxpayer is
Let's go to next slide.
In a difficult spot vis-a-vis the information that tax administration collected and already processed, and probably he was involved only at the very end of the procedures. I think that I agree that we are in a difficult and gray area, and this is something that we should be aware and try to fight. That this is not the case.
It is already the case because a lot of government institutions are connected with each other. The taxation office is connected with the social security office, is connected with other parts of government, and to exchange information about anything which could be of interest to ask for the taxpayer, which he is not is just violating any law whatsoever, tax law or not non-tax law. So there is a lot of overriding information already in place, and now it is being supported by this data analytics, which is a double advantage to all kinds of authorities. Yeah.
Going next slide, please.
Yeah.
So we try to brainstorm that what with this slide only, what can be the possible solutions or how we can make this process more efficient between the tax administration side or the taxpayer side. So the first point, we thought that there is a requirement of hiring technical people like data scientists, data mining people from both sides. Even if tax authority appoints such kind of people and the taxpayer doesn't have such knowledgeable workforce from data mining perspective, the system will not work in a fair and smooth manner. So we think that there should be some hiring from the data science, some hiring of data scientist people or data mining people who are able to understand the intricacies of the data field. And from the Netherlands perspective, I could say that tax authorities have started appointing such kind of people and in their workforce, at least, to analyze this aspects also. Zoe, next slide. Louan, would you like to go through this slide? In this, we have tried to highlight how the cycle have reduced from earlier days in the digital world when it comes to digital compliance. I'll just hand over to Louan to explain more.
Yeah, well, I think it's clear of itself. The traditional compliance model versus the digital compliance model. And the point is the traditional compliance model gives a couple of is sliced into time portions, request from account data from accounting, analyze, calculate adjustment, prepare form, and then submit return. Yeah, and there's another one, assessment, I think. That's a logical sequence which we can follow. And the digital is more sort of similar time process. You extract data, then submit it directly to government. There's an e-audit, an e-asset, and what is it?
E-match.
E-match. Oh yeah, e-match. And then response to assumptions and audits. Well, I think that is more integrated, and that's immediately the danger. That's not sequential positions, but just similarity and also equal time positions, and that's the big difference, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Louan, would you like to comment something from taxpayer right perspective? Like, will this raise more of an issue from taxpayer right perspective? Like taxpayer now have less number of days to raise their grievances or to address their concerns.
Yeah, I think that let's take the example of artificial intelligence and also the so-called machine learning. These are all not non-human constructions with some human aspects and capabilities, but not the full human aspects and capabilities. For instance, humans, if there is a closed set of arguments analyzed by an artificial intelligence bot, And so it's unambiguous that this is the case, and this is the tax which has not been paid, should have been paid. He is not including any possible counter arguments. That's only the person itself. Yes, but when I had it and the result this one, that's not the logical analytics. I think I wonder whether it is so, but I think that is not the case, because it's otherwise you shouldn't have lawyers in place. If the artificial intelligence bot have all the pro and cons in its brain, you need no lawyers anymore. But I think you have a lawyer. You need a lawyer as well. Maybe a lawyer can also be a robot. Can also be, but that's one step further. But that's what I think, that it's that you need taxpayer rights.
Mm-hmm. Because at the end, the taxpayer will enter the scene only in the audit after the match is done, and the cycle reduced tremendously from 3 years to 90 days.
Yeah.
And the fact is that really there is a need to be ready to react in a fast mode. So the dispute resolution strategy by corporations should not be in place in a reactive mode. Is something that is needed now, and it's something that should be invested and taken into consideration. And here in this example, we could also mention the Brazil example, which exactly we see exactly this reduction in time.
Yeah.
And the fact that the taxpayers don't know that their data is being tested, and they are only aware when they will finally receive the penalty or the interest or the notice.
Yeah.
And all the facts of the case have already been built by the tax administration, undermine their rights and the powers, the information power that the administration has vis-a-vis the taxpayer, putting in a difficult position, of course.
Yeah.
Like you said, Filipa, I would like to diverge from little bit from your viewpoint. Like you said that the taxpayer will be involved only in the last stages, but the data is generated from the taxpayer system. Why can't taxpayer have control from the initial stages? Taxpayers should build up mechanism wherein the data is generated in such a manner that taxpayer has entire control over the data that is extracted from the taxpayer system.
Yes, this taxpayers need to invest in technology, but this is not always the case, and they don't have the same tools in terms of technology that a country will have as well. We have countries like Australia that have even built a department to understand the technology that they should invest in order to improve their tax collection and their tax. So we don't have the same resources and the access to the same level of technology that the tax administration have. Not in all the cases, at least.
Yeah.
That's right.
But I'm just wondering, might be a question which nobody of us have an answer, that on one hand, taxpayer is saying to tax authorities to make system more efficient. Now, say they are trying to make system more efficient by use of technology, and then the cycle is being reduced, and then the taxpayer again jumps up, no, this is impacting my taxpayer right. So how should tax authority handle such situation? Because on one hand, they are trying to streamline the process and use technology. Louan, you have any suggestion? Because even this question is such that nobody of us might have answer.
Yeah, but what was your last sentence? I didn't follow. What are the position of the taxpayer? What is the position of the taxpayer?
So I am repeating my question. So my
Yeah.
question is that on one hand, the taxpayer have been blaming tax authorities or have been raising complaint. No, the system is too manual. The tax authority should do some online system. And when the tax authority brings on in technology, the cycle
Yeah.
reduces to 90 days. That, of course, bring efficiencies to the system.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
the taxpayer again raises this question, oh, by doing this, you are impacting my taxpayer right. Is
Yeah.
this fair argument?
Uh,
Or
Not always. It is not a fair argument if the taxpayer knows of itself that he is committing fraud on a major base, because he can then it is exceeding the ordinary tax field, and it is just touching the crime investigation aspect, because that is a crime. If you pay major part of your taxation, you do not pay, then you're committing a crime. That's logical. You can also that's apart from the tax authorities, you have the penal authorities who can put you in jail and put a penal penalty or whatever, and other measures. So that depends on the character and the scope of that they override their taxpayer rights and their private position. Anyway, so we have to see from case to case. But in principle, is an ordinary citizen, you can say, yes, you are violating my taxpayer rights. Yes, could be.
And we have only 5 minutes, I guess. I wanted to, in terms of taxpayer rights, I wanted, if I may, also to bring further
so,
issue to the
yeah.
discussion. Nupur, is the fact that we have more and more transparency. We live in a transparent environment. We have the big brother watching us. What about our right to privacy, and what about the cybersecurity? What about the proper storage of data? Are we sure that tax authorities are limiting the opportunities for fraud? How is this information exchange? Should we invest in a blockchain procedure to be sure that this information leaves one place and arrives to the other tax administration without being touched? Are we safe if tax administration use data analytics through the private sector, like subcontracts,